Hi, everyone. This is Michael Kennedy from the University of Virginia, and welcome to our video for high leverage practice number 21. Teach students to maintain and generalize new learning across time and settings. Here's my contact information should you have any need to send me a note, but please feel free to do so at your leisure. So let's get into my formal remarks about HLP 21. It's a very interesting practice. It's at the end. There's 22 HLPs. This is number 21. And in some ways, HLP 21 is the forgotten man, or a bit overshadowed by others in the instruction domain, just given how important so many of the practices in the instruction domain are. Examples being HLP number 11, to create and set long and short-term learning goals. Obviously, that's really critical. HLP 13 is all around creating and using adaptations, accommodations, or modifications to help students achieve those learning goals that were set. Certainly HLP 16, which is all around using explicit instruction, but also HLP 22, which is to provide students with high quality feedback, and HLP 18, which is to engage students. I'd certainly note HLP 20 as being really critical around using intensive instruction and intensive intervention. But when you add these practices up, what they really end up doing is not saying those are more important than HLP 21, but really, that should be 21, but what I'm really saying is those practices that I just mentioned actually set the foundation for high leverage practice 21 to teach students to maintain and generalize their learning across time and settings. And I'll be talking more about this because this is a key theme of this practice as I go along. So why has this happened, that teaching students to generalize and use practices across time and settings not been a priority? And one of the reasons why is just that there are so many other practices, both high leverage and evidence-based, and then everything else on the list of a teacher that we need to do. And teaching students to learn something once in one setting, geez, that's hard enough, let alone teaching them to then go and be able to do that practice someplace else. So this is really the main explanation for why we don't spend a lot of time thinking about generalization, even though I'm arguing that we absolutely should make this a priority practice and spend more time thinking about it. So I'm glad that you're with us today to hear some remarks about it. Getting students to the place where they can maintain their ability to utilize a skill, piece of knowledge, or strategy, and then actually generalize it to another setting. There's really not a ton in the life of a student with a disability that's more important than being able to do that, as we think of not just about the closed academic standards that we expect them to meet in schools, but we think about what life beyond school actually has in store for these students. We really need adaptable, skillful, creative students that are able to use the knowledge and skills that they have in order to make sense of different situations as they arise. That's why this practice is so important. And what it really comes down to is, for HLP 21, we want to need students who learn a skill or strategy in setting A to be able to apply that skill or strategy in setting B, and do so as independently as possible. That's really what we're after with respect to this practice. But this is not an easy task. Students and their teachers need perseverance. If you get the joke, congratulations. You need perseverance, but also a ton of training. Few of us could walk out the door right now and run a marathon, and in some instances, that's really what we're asking students to do. If you've been watching this series, you'll also know about HLP number 12, which is to provide systematically designed instruction based on the student's learning goals that can help them be successful. And one of the things that we should systematically design for is generalization and maintenance of skills, knowledge, and strategies that are going to be utilized. So we have to think about what does it take to get a student to a place where they can do this successfully. And I like this crawl, walk, run, fly because we need to start on the left-hand side. Students aren't going to be able to maintain or generalize anything if they can't learn it the first time successfully in one setting. So we really have to pay special attention to how are we going to get a student with baseline success and competence before we try to do these more advanced techniques. And I really want you to remember this when it comes to HLP 21. It's not going to happen by magic. It's not going to happen by giving students one specific lesson that's delivered one time. It takes a real commitment in order for students to be successful in terms of using this practice. So I've got some recommendations laid out that I hope you'll find useful, interesting, and helpful for implementing this practice. The first is you're already doing it. Is if you're watching this video, you're giving this practice attention. And that alone is big because it means you're actually thinking about, wait a minute, I've got a set of students with disabilities or those who are struggling, and one of the big challenges we have is they're not strategic necessarily on their own, or they're not as strategic as we'd like them to be, and so they're learning a whole bunch of information but not being successful realizing, hey, this paraphrasing strategy I learned in language arts class, I could have used that in science. I could have used it in social studies. That's what this is all about. So I applaud that you're even thinking about this practice. The next is which skills, strategies, pieces of knowledge are good candidates for how and where the student will need them across content areas and settings. This is very important. So how we select really should be based on an input of a range of educators across the IEP team and across just the school day that the student is existing in, but also getting input from the family members to realize, hey, these are skills that they're going to need at home, at school, in the community, and then beyond school. So making good decisions is the first thing that you really want to think about. Is this skill or strategy a good candidate for, we want to give a lot of attention and a lot of time to this because it's going to pay off. That's my first recommendation. And be deliberate when you're assembling the IEP team, when you're making these decisions about, hey, this paraphrasing strategy that we're going to teach across content areas, I want to be deliberate and invite my colleagues, perhaps the mathematics teacher. This isn't something that they give a lot of thought to. They don't do a lot of paraphrasing in mathematics, though it is possible. So I want to be deliberate and invite them to come and be part of these conversations and be part of the deliberations. I think that'll be really helpful for your team. The next recommendation is you have to be explicit in terms of how you're actually teaching students to maintain and generalize their information. If you're not really knowledgeable about using explicit instruction, CEC and the HLP website has a ton of free resources around this. I have linked here the video that was produced around explicit instruction. Go get Anita Archer and Charlie Yu's book titled Explicit Instruction. But you really need to think about, okay, when I'm giving students that first exposure to the new strategy, skill, knowledge, I want to give lots of clear cues to make sure I'm orienting them to the key information. Everything I say to them should be chunked and super clear. I'm not using other words that the kids don't know. I want to give key information more than once. We're famous for this as teachers, that we say things once and assume they were listening, and they're going to learn it based on me saying it out loud one time. We want to give kids lots of opportunities to respond and a wide variety of those OTRs, and give feedback on their performance. We want to do a lot of modeling of our expertness and our expert thinking across a range of examples, and then also give them guided practice where I'm still in charge as the teacher, giving students chances to show their knowledge, and I'm giving them a lot of feedback on their performance before I give them opportunities to practice what they've learned. But I don't just say, and go, and walk away. I'm still paying a lot of attention. So a big part of HLP 21 and its potential for success is right here in HLP 16, to use explicit instruction. You also need to give students a lot of reinforcement around their use of the new skill, strategy, or piece of knowledge that you're trying to get them to use across different settings. You need to figure out what are reinforcing to the student, and this is going to vary. Some students like to get a lot of reinforcement every single time. Others work better with a variable kind of feedback. This is the kind of thing that teachers find out as you get to know students, and different members of the IEP team will have good information to share on this topic. And similar to my comment on explicit instruction, you really want students to overlearn what they're doing. You want them to get automatic, at least in that first setting. If a student is really confident using the RAP paraphrasing strategy, read a paragraph, ask yourself, did I understand it? P, put it in your own words. If I can get a student where they're really automatic, they use the strategy on their own, they're successful in using the strategy on their own in language arts, I'm in good position then to take them to mathematics or take them to social studies or science and apply that strategy because they can do it really, really well. That's the key here. And you have to teach students to be self-managers. Self-management is really important. A student who does not self-manage well or successfully, they're not going to have an easy time remembering that I could learn and apply my knowledge across different settings. It's just not likely. We want students to build their skills so that they can do something accurately, they can do it fluently, they can maintain the knowledge that they've learned, and then they can get to the generalization phase. This is sort of the way we would think about teaching students anything, right? Anytime I'm trying to teach a student some new piece of information or skill that they're going to apply, this is really the formula. This is the path that we follow in order for them to be successful. We have to think about HLP 21 in the same exact way, but it's broader because it's not just us and it's not just the student. We have to work across our colleagues. This is why HLPs numbers 1 through 3, the collaboration HLPs, is so important, because I'm relying on my colleagues and family members to a large extent to work together to help the student be a success. One of the things I recommend is you want to teach students a sequential modification. What that means, that sounds like a fancy term, it's deceptively simple. But what it's all about is, hey, how did you teach the student to do this skill, strategy, or piece of information here in setting 1? Let's use those same techniques in setting 2. That's really what we're talking about here. This is why collaboration across teachers and across settings is so important, because I'm not going to know this if I don't ever speak to the other teachers that are involved. And within that same genre, what is reinforcing to a student? I may learn that in social studies, the student is very much reinforced through orally delivered specific feedback. Many students are. I want to share that information with my colleagues in science, or at the elementary level, perhaps with the art teacher, or the music teacher, or at PE. Or maybe the PE teacher picks up on something that's reinforcing and shares that with the reading specialist or the SPED teacher. This is what I'm talking about in terms of figuring out across the team and across the life of the student, family members involved here, to find out what is naturally reinforcing for the student, and then let's put those contingencies in place so we can help the student use their new skill or knowledge in different settings. We have to make sure that students don't just practice one strategy one way. There's variability within any given new piece of information that they're learning. So they need lots of repetition, lots of feedback, and they need to practice with different variations so that they have a good chance to help be successful as they get into new settings. Because a lot of kids with disabilities, I'm thinking about kids with autism as an example, these students are often very rigid. They only like to do things one way, which makes sense. Who doesn't? But when it comes to utilizing a skill or a strategy, like the example of the rap paraphrasing strategy I've been using, well, I need to have some flexibility in order to realize, oh, I could use it in social studies, and here's how it would be different than mathematics or language arts. But we don't need students to be perfect. That usually isn't the expectation. We're trying to get kids over that preliminary hump so they can be a success. So we're trying to give kids little curveballs, if you'll allow, in order to help them get comfortable with making adjustments on the fly. And I need to scaffold this. I need to plan to do that, and I need to be deliberate about it. That's, if you boiled this session down to what is this practice all about, it's about being deliberate about helping students generalize and maintain their knowledge. Thinking about maybe a Venn diagram. I'm in setting 1. Here's how this strategy or skill is used here. Now let's think about setting 2. Here's how I taught it in setting 1. Here's how you could teach it in setting 2. But none of this is possible if I don't actually have a relationship with my other colleagues, and we're not thinking about that I in IEP, that individual student who needs a lot of specialized thinking and planning in order for them to be successful. And sadly, this is the reason why I think we don't do a good job of implementing HLP 21, is because we don't do this. We're just busy people. We have our own expectations that are put upon us. We have our curriculum to get through, all the standards. We've got our own lives to lead. And so it's very difficult to sit down with colleagues on a regular basis to think about implementation of specific strategies and skills in those different settings. We simply have to do it. We have to help students with their generalization. So we're basically thinking about training for self-management. We're thinking about, perhaps a 7th grade student with behavior difficulties, and they've been able to use a self-management strategy in the homeroom with the homeroom teacher, but when they go to art class, they're having a lot of trouble. Well, teaching the student to be self-managers and understand that that self-management strategy can work in both settings, that's possible. But again, it takes time, it takes energy in order to be successful. You have to heap on the specific praise and reinforcement and feedback to students. Students are not going to be successful in any endeavor, but certainly something as difficult as applying new skills and knowledge across settings if they're not getting a whole bunch of high quality feedback from their teachers and others they interact with. And then finally, don't hesitate to collect data to evaluate the effectiveness of what you're doing. We're collecting all kinds of data, I hope, for progress monitoring across a range of skills and competencies. We really need to be thinking about doing the same thing for generalization and maintenance of specific skills and strategies. And this can come out of HLP 11, where we're setting specific goals around the need to implement this practice. So this was a short, but I hope informative introduction to HLP 21, the forgotten man, the shadow man of the practices, if you'll allow. But as I argue, it absolutely should not be. And keep thinking about this practice. And as you think about implementation of the other HLPs, both across the collaboration, assessment, and instruction, and social behavior for that matter, but across the instruction domains, always be thinking, as I'm using this skill or using this practice, how could it be applied toward helping students be a success in maintaining and generalizing the information that they're learning? Because that's what we're after, is students who can be a success in the world and be flexible. So thanks a lot. Have a great day, and I'll look forward to our next session. Take care.